Chapter 2 of The Angel of Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Angel of Terror by Edgar Wallace. Chapter 2. Lydia Beale gathered up the scraps of paper that littered her table, rolled them into a ball, and tossed them into the fire. There was a knock at the door, and she half turned in her chair to meet with a smile her stout landlady, who came in carrying a tray on which stood a large cup of tea and 2 thick and wholesome slices of bread and jam. "Finished, Miss Beale?" asked the landlady anxiously. "For the day, yes," said the girl with a nod, and stood up, stretching herself stiffly. She was slender, a head taller than the dumpy Mrs. Morgan. The dark violet eyes and the delicate spiritual face she owed to her Celtic ancestors. The grace of her movements, no less than the perfect hands that rested on the drawing-board, spoke eloquently of breed. "I'd like to see it, miss, if I may," said Mrs. Morgan, wiping her hands on her apron in anticipation. Lydia pulled open a drawer of the table and took out a large sheet of Windsor board. She had completed her pencil sketch, and Mrs. Morgan gasped appreciatively. It was a picture of a masked man holding a villainous crowd at bay at the point of a pistol. "That's wonderful, miss," she said in awe. "I suppose those sorts of things happen, too." The girl laughed as she put the drawing away. "They happen in stories which I illustrate, Mrs. Morgan," she said dryly. "The real brigands of life come in the shape of lawyers' clerks with writs and summonses. It's a relief from those mad fashion plates I draw, anyway. Do you know, Mrs. Morgan, that the sight of a dressmaker's shop window makes me positively ill?" Mrs. Morgan shook her head sympathetically, and Lydia changed the subject. "Has anybody been this afternoon?" she asked. "Only the young man from Spadd and Newton," replied the stout woman with a sigh. "I told him you was out, but I'm a bad liar." The girl groaned. "I wonder if I shall ever get to the end of those debts," she said in despair. "I've enough writs in the drawer to paper the house, Mrs. Morgan." 3 years ago Lydia Beale's father had died, and she had lost the best friend and companion that any girl ever had. She knew he was in debt, but had no idea how extensively he was involved. A creditor had seen her the day after the funeral, and had made some uncouth reference to the convenience of a death which had automatically cancelled George Beale's obligations. It needed only that to spur the girl to an action which was as foolish as it was generous. She had written to all the people to whom her father owed money, and had assumed full responsibility for debts amounting to hundreds of pounds. It was the Celt in her that drove her to shoulder the burden which she was ill-equipped to carry, but she had never regretted her impetuous act. There were a few creditors who, realising what had happened, did not bother her, and there were others. She earned a fairly good salary on the staff of the Daily Megaphone, which made a feature of fashion, but she would have had to have been the recipient of a cabinet minister's emoluments to have met the demands which flowed in upon her a month after she had accepted her father's obligations. "Are you going out to-night, miss?" asked the woman. Lydia roused herself from her unpleasant thoughts. "Yes, I'm making some drawings of the dresses in Curfew's new play. I'll be home somewhere around 12. Mrs. Morgan was half-way across the room when she turned back. "One of these days you'll get out of all your troubles, miss. You see if you don't. I'll bet you'll marry a rich young gentleman." Lydia, sitting on the edge of the table, laughed. "You'd lose your money, Mrs. Morgan," she said. "Rich young gentlemen only marry poor working girls in the kind of stories I illustrate. If I marry, it will probably be a very poor young gentleman, who will become an incurable invalid and want nursing, and I shall hate him so much that I can't be happy with him, and pity him so much that I can't run away from him." Mrs. Morgan sniffed her disagreement. "There are things that happen," she began. "Not to me, not miracles, anyway," said Lydia, still smiling, "and I don't know that I want to get married. I've got to pay all these bills first, and by the time they are settled I'll be a grey-haired old lady in a mob cap." Lydia had finished her tea, and was standing somewhat scantily attired in the middle of her bedroom, preparing for her theatre engagement, when Mrs. Morgan returned. "I forgot to tell you, miss," she said, "there was a gentleman and a lady called." "A gentleman and a lady? Who were they?" "I don't know, Miss Beale. I was lying down at the time, and the girl answered the door. I gave her strict orders to say that you were out." "Did they leave any name?" "No, miss. They just asked if Miss Beale lived here, and could they see her." Said Lydia with a frown. "I wonder what we owe them." She dismissed the matter from her mind, and thought no more of it until she stopped on her way to the theatre to learn from the office by telephone the number of drawings required. The chief sub-editor answered her. "And by the way," he added, "there was an inquiry for you at the office to-day. I found a note of it on my desk when I came in to-night. Some old friends of yours who want to see you. Brand told them you were going to do a show at the Irving Theatre to-night, so you'll probably see them." "Who are they?" she asked, puzzled. She had few friends, old or new. "I haven't the foggiest idea," was the reply. At the theatre she saw nobody she knew, though she looked around interestedly, nor was she approached in any of the entr'actes. In the row ahead of her, and a little to her right, were two people who regarded her curiously as she entered. The man was about 50, very dark and bald. The skin of his head was almost copper-coloured, though he was obviously a European, for the eyes which beamed benevolently upon her through powerful spectacles were blue, but so light a blue that by contrast with the mahogany skin of his clean-shaven face they seemed almost white. The girl who sat with him was fair, and to Lydia's artistic eye singularly lovely. Her hair was a mop of fine gold. The colour was natural. Lydia was too sophisticated to make any mistake about that. Her features were regular and flawless. The young artist thought she had never seen so perfect a Cupid mouth in her life. There was something so freshly, fragrantly innocent about the girl that Lydia's heart went out to her, and she could hardly keep her eyes on the stage. The unknown seemed to take almost as much interest in her, for twice Lydia surprised her backward scrutiny. She found herself wondering who she was. The girl was beautifully dressed, and about her neck was a platinum chain that must have hung to her waist, a chain which was broken every few inches by a big emerald. It required something of an effort of concentration to bring her mind back to the stage and her work. With a book on her knee, she sketched the somewhat bizarre costumes which had aroused a mild public interest in the play, and for the moment forgot her entrancing companion. She came through the vestibule at the end of the performance, and drew her worn cloak more closely about her slender shoulders, for the night was raw, and a sou'westerly wind blew the big wet snowflakes under the protecting glass awning into the lobby itself. The favoured playgoers minced daintily through the slush to their waiting cars. Then taxis came into the procession of waiting vehicles. There was a banging of cab doors, a babble of orders to the scurrying attendants, until something like order was evolved from the chaos. "Cab, miss?" Lydia shook her head. An omnibus would take her to Fleet Street, but two had passed, packed with passengers, and she was beginning to despair when a particularly handsome taxi pulled up at the curb. The driver leant over the shining apron, which partially protected him from the weather, and shouted, "Is Miss Beale there?" The girl started in surprise, taking a step toward the cab. "I am Miss Beale," she said. "Your editor has sent me for you," said the man briskly. The editor of the Megaphone had been guilty of many eccentric acts. He had expressed views on her drawing which she shivered to recall. He had aroused her in the middle of the night to sketch dresses at a fancy dress ball. But never before had he done anything so human as to send a taxi for her. Nevertheless, she would not look at the gift cab too closely, and she stepped into the warm interior. The windows were veiled with the snow and the sleet which had been falling all the time she had been in the theatre. She saw blurred lights flash past, and realised that the taxi was going at a good pace. She rubbed the windows, and tried to look out after a while. Then she endeavoured to lower one, but without success. Suddenly she jumped up and tapped furiously at the window to attract the driver's attention. There was no mistaking the fact that they were crossing a bridge, and it was not necessary to cross a bridge to reach Fleet Street. If the driver heard, he took no notice. The speed of the car increased. She tapped at the window again, furiously. She was not afraid, but she was angry. Presently fear came. It was when she tried to open the door and found that it was fastened from the outside that she struck a match to discover that the windows had been screwed tight. The edge of the hole where the screw had gone in was rawly new, and the screw's head was bright and shining. She had no umbrella, she never carried one to the theatre, and nothing more substantial in the shape of a weapon than a fountain pen. She could smash the windows with her foot. She sat back in the seat, and discovered that it was not so easy an operation as she had thought. She hesitated even to make the attempt. And then the panic sense left her, and she was her own calm self again. She was not being abducted. These things did not happen in the 20th century, except in sensational books. She frowned. She had said almost the same thing to somebody that day. To Mrs. Morgan, who had hinted at a romantic marriage. Of course, nothing was wrong. The driver had called her by name. Probably the editor wanted to see her at his home. He lived somewhere in South London, she remembered. That would explain everything. And yet her instinct told her that something unusual was happening, that some unpleasant experience was imminent. She tried to put the thought out of her mind, but it was too vivid, too insistent. Again she tried the door, and then, conscious of a faint reflected glow on the cloth-lined roof of the cab, she looked backward through the peep-hole. She saw two great motor-car lamps within a few yards of the cab. A car was following. She glimpsed the outline of it as they ran past a street standard. They were in one of the roads of the outer suburbs. Looking through the window, over the driver's shoulder, she saw trees on one side of the road, and a long grey fence. It was while she was so looking that the car behind shot suddenly past and ahead, and she saw its tail lights moving away with a pang of hopelessness. Then, before she realized what had happened, the big car ahead slowed and swung sideways, blocking the road, and the cab came to a jerky stop that flung her against the window. She saw two figures in the dim light of the taxi's headlamps, heard somebody speak, and the door was jerked open. "Will you step out, Miss Beale?" said a pleasant voice, and though her legs seemed queerly weak, she obliged. The second man was standing by the side of the driver. He wore a long raincoat, the collar of which was turned up to the tip of his nose. "You may go back to your friends and tell them that Miss Beale is in good hands," he was saying. "You may also burn a candle or two before your favourite saint in thanksgiving that you are alive." "I don't know what you're talking about," said the driver sulkily. "I'm taking this young lady to her office." "Since when has the Daily Megaphone been published in the ghastly suburbs?" asked the other politely. He saw the girl and raised his hat. "Come along, Miss Beale," he said. "I promise you a more comfortable ride, even if I cannot guarantee that the end will be less startling." End of chapter 2.